Okay, so you've learnt about Durkheim's theory of suicide in the past when you studied crime and deviance. We started this lesson off by creating a freeze frame to demonstrate the structuralist theory of society, where we talk about how the agencies control the people and how they're indoctrinated to believe that they should be controlled. And many of you showed how there's one person in charge and then all the people have to follow what that person says. So we're looking at the consensus theory's perspective of society today. Again, a structuralist view, looking at how society influences the individual. So Durkheim said that society is responsible for the most personal act of suicide, and you were asked to think about 5 words that are used to describe this and to explain this. So we're talking about the lack of anomie, we're talking about consensus, cohesion, we're talking about how people will follow the rules and norms and values of society, and everything remains in consensus and people just pretty much do as they're told. So the key ideas are that we have cohesion, collective consciousness, and people all buy into that and follow it. Durkheim took this quote from Aristotle, who said that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, meaning that society as a whole is much more important than the individual. Social facts can be measured, so it's a quantitative approach where we can measure things like money, law, language. Durkheim also said that we could measure behaviour and quantify this and look at patterns and trends, which is useful for society being reliable. It can be representative, as large sample sizes can be gathered. Society is objective. Again, we can take away our own values when studying society. We can simply look at what the facts are and measure those in an objective way that's value-free, lack of bias. So Durkheim was writing between, 1858, he was born then, but then he was writing after that until 1917. He said about suicide being a personal act, which we've discussed, and how society creates this as a social fact. Suicide is the reaction to a state of anomie, as we know that's normlessness, and also a reduction in social solidarity as a result of this anomie, usually as a result of changes in society, which we now know to be the change between mechanical and organic solidarity. So going from subsistence farming, where people create their own food, they work for the lord of the manor, and they've moved on to a society where they're working for money in the city. So we've got a state of urbanisation as a result of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was kick-started as a result of the Enlightenment, where we've got a belief in science rather than religion. And so functionalists said that this change, whilst it happened slowly and methodically and organically, it was something that could have created anomie. However, people managed to cope with it pretty well. And Durkheim explains that. So we actually created this diagram where we were saying about how mechanical solidarity turns into organic solidarity. With mechanical, again, you've got people working on the land, you've still got massive inequalities, you've got landowners, you've got land workers. Often the workers would be living on the land that the Lord owned, and if you didn't work for them, you didn't have a home. So when the Industrial Revolution happened, fewer people were needed to work on the land because of things like tractors being invented and other machinery like combine harvesters. And also people knew that in the city there were more opportunities, more jobs, and they quite liked the idea of getting money. So we've suddenly got this more of a capitalist society being developed, but remember we're talking about functionalism, not Marxism, but where money is the main currency. And so people are living in small accommodation. So we've got the rise of the nuclear family. We're ditching the extended family, which was present during mechanical solidarity, because we've got smaller living quarters and people can't afford to keep their extended family. So again, you need to use the Peel paragraphs to explain this when you're writing an essay. Parsons, one of our lovely famous functionalists, talked about how through these changes we have this process of agile adaptation, how people grow and develop and change themselves to fit in with the changes in society. Goal attainment, the fact that we're aiming for something that's similar. Again, this whole idea of consensus. We all agree what is good and we all aim for those things. Integration, so being part of this new society, wanting to feel like you're part of it. A bit like when a migrant comes to the UK and they might try and integrate into the society by learning the language, maybe dressing differently. So Parsons argues that that's what people do to fit in. And then latency is the way that our families and the other institutions around us help and support us into these new roles. I asked you to create a definition of these, so you've got this in your notes. And we need to make sure that when we're answering questions that are to do with the consensus theory of society, we talk about how people remain cohesive in times of change. So even though Durkheim said that anomie is a result of change, we need to talk about why people don't start rioting and going a bit crazy during these times. I then asked you to do a lovely little diagram of how mechanical solidarity changed to organic solidarity from a traditional to modern society, and we've got examples of people working in the fields all the way through to people working in the factories, where we start putting our children to work and we exploit them. Again, remember we're talking about functionalism, so Durkheim is like, yeah, this is a good thing. We need people in charge and we need the children to work cheaply because it means that the families can afford their food and so on. And this is the little table you did. So a question that you could be asked is to what extent social order is maintained during times of change according to functionalist perspective, and you could probably think about 6 arguments to support it using examples of where we see society maintaining its cohesion and consensus despite the fact that there's lots of changes. And that was our first lesson.